Boss Bullies, his worker at factory, the worker snapped his arm in rage. Kieran Moss had always been the type of person who faded into the background. Standing barely 5'6", with a slight frame that made his work clothes hang loose, he moved through Thornfield manufacturing like a ghost. His dark hair fell across his forehead, helping him avoid eye contact, and his quiet voice rarely rose above the machinery's hum. 3 months into his factory job, most people barely noticed him, except when they needed someone to blame. The Thornfield plant outside Cleveland echoed with hydraulic presses and conveyor belts. Kieran worked assembly line C, installing circuit boards with methodical precision. The work suited him, repetitive, solitary, requiring focus rather than social interaction. But Vance Kruger had other plans. Vance stood 6'3" with the build of someone who'd played high school football and never let anyone forget it. As floor supervisor, he wore authority like a badge, his thick neck supporting a perpetually red head. Small eyes above a twice-broken nose constantly scanned for weakness. In Kieran, he'd found the perfect target. "Hey, Mouse!" Vance's voice boomed across the factory during shift change. Kieran kept his head down, ignoring the nickname that had stuck after his first week. "Your station's running behind again." Kieran glanced up from his workbench, where circuit boards awaited installation. His quota numbers were actually the highest on the floor, but correcting Vance would make things worse. "I'll pick up the pace," he said quietly. "You'll pick up the pace." Vance mimicked Kieran's soft tone, drawing snickers from his crew. Rick Bannister, heavy-set with tree-trunk arms, and Dylan Torres, whose cruel smile revealed a gold tooth, flanked their supervisor like attack dogs. "How about you pick up your pathetic attitude?" Other workers, Maria Santos, Jake Patterson, old Pete Kowalski, kept their eyes on their stations. Everyone had bills to pay. Getting involved wasn't worth losing a job. What none of them knew was that Kieran had spent 8 years in the Army Rangers. The slight frame concealed a body honed by combat training. His soft voice masked a mind that could neutralize threats with surgical precision. But civilian life meant different rules, and Kieran had sworn he'd left that life behind. The first major incident happened during lunch. Kieran sat alone, eating while reading a worn paperback under harsh fluorescent lights. Well, if it isn't our favorite mouse. Vance's shadow fell across Kieran's book. Behind him, Rick cracked knuckles while Dylan grinned. "What you reading, college boy?" "Just a book." Vance snatched it away. "The Count of Monte Cristo." "Look at this, boys. Mouse thinks he's intellectual." He tore the book in half with a sharp rip that echoed across the suddenly quiet cafeteria. Pages fluttered like wounded birds. Kieran's hands tightened into fists. In his mind, he could see exactly how it would go. Strike to Vance's solar plexus, knee to his face. 30 seconds, all 3 on the ground. Instead, Kieran stood slowly and began picking up torn pages. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I was almost finished anyway." The cafeteria erupted in nervous laughter. Vance beamed while his crew celebrated. As Kieran gathered the last pages, he caught sight of Emma Rodriguez watching from across the room. She worked quality control, petite with intelligent brown eyes and black hair pulled back practically. Unlike others, her expression held sympathy rather than amusement. The pattern continued for weeks. Vance assigned heaviest lifting despite Kieran's build, then criticized slowness. He scheduled worst shifts and dirtiest jobs. When Kieran completed tasks without complaint, Vance found new humiliations. One evening, finishing a late shift, Emma appeared at his station. "You don't have to take this," she said softly. "What Vance is doing, it's not right." Up close, Emma was prettier than he'd noticed. Her concern seemed genuine, which made it dangerous. "I can handle it," he said. "From where I sit, it looks like he's trying to push you out. I've seen this before." Emma moved closer. "He picks someone, makes their life miserable until they quit." "Why are you telling me this?" Emma hesitated. Because you seem like a good person, and because I think you're stronger than you let people see." Their eyes met, and Kieran felt warmth shift in his chest. But footsteps echoed, and Emma quickly moved away as security made rounds. That weekend, Kieran thought about Emma's words while going through his apartment routine. The one bedroom was sparse but clean, an American flag from service, a unit photo, and in the closet, a heavy bag hanging from reinforced ceiling mount. He'd bought the bag when he moved to Cleveland, calling it exercise. But now, wrapping his hands and working through combinations, he realized he'd been preparing. His body moved with fluid precision, jab, cross, hook, uppercut. Each strike landed with devastating accuracy. Kieran had learned to fight where hesitation meant death. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez taught him size didn't matter with leverage and will. A small wolf can take down a big dog if the wolf knows what it is. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was civilian life, where punching meant assault charges and losing everything. So Kieran had buried that part, choosing tolerance over retaliation. Monday brought new cruelty. Vance had spent the weekend planning. As Kieran clocked in, his station had been moved to the floor's center, surrounded by other stations where everyone could watch. A handwritten sign on his chair read, "Mouse House." "Thought you might like a social workspace," Vance announced. "Maybe being around real workers will teach productivity." Throughout morning, Vance visited Kieran's station every 20 minutes, timing with a stopwatch and shaking his head dramatically. 14 seconds per unit. Corporate standard is 12. Mouse needs remedial training. During lunch, harassment turned darker. Kieran was eating at his corner table when Vance approached with his crew and several workers. "You know what, Mouse? I've been thinking about your performance issues." Vance's voice carried across the cafeteria. "Maybe you're just not factory material. Maybe you should find work suited to your delicate nature." Rick laughed loudly. "Yeah, like filing papers." "Or the ladies' restroom," Dylan added, sending the group into hysterics. Kieran felt heat rise as conversations stopped. Everyone was watching. Emma sat 2 tables away, her face tight with anger, but outnumbered and outranked. "I'm just trying to do my job," Kieran said evenly. "Your job?" Vance leaned down, face inches away. His breath smelled of cigarettes and stale coffee. "Your job is whatever I say. And right now, I say entertain us. Where'd you come from before crawling into our factory?" Kieran's training screamed warnings. Vance was establishing dominance through public humiliation, using the crowd as witnesses. The smart play was de-escalation. "I moved here from Columbus, needed work." "Columbus?" Vance straightened, grinning. "Big city boy, huh? That explains the soft hands and prissy attitude. Bet you never done real work." The crowd laughed on cue. Kieran noticed how many avoided his eyes, ashamed but unwilling to risk attention. Only Emma met his gaze, her expression apologetic and frustrated. "Matter of fact, I bet Mouse has never been in a real fight. Probably runs away at trouble's first sign. Ain't that right?" Kieran looked at his hands, calloused from military training and factory work, scarred from combat and accidents. If Vance only knew what these hands had done. "Yeah," Kieran said softly. "I avoid trouble." The crowd laughed harder. As laughter died and people returned to lunch, Kieran noticed Emma shaking her head, disappointment visible across the room. That afternoon brought the worst incident yet. Kieran was working when Vance appeared with Rick and Dylan, plus a clipboard and official inspection form. "Random quality check, Mouse," Vance announced loudly. "Corporate's asking about Line C defect rates. Guess which station they want focused on." Kieran watched Vance pick up a completed assembly and pretend to examine it. The unit was perfect. Kieran took pride in his work, but that wouldn't matter. Well, well. Vance held up the housing for nearby workers to see. "Major defect here. Rick, what do you see?" Rick squinted at the perfect unit. "Circuit board's not seated right." "Exactly. Vance slammed it down hard enough to damage it. Sloppy work costing thousands in returns. Dillon, mark critical failure. This was more than harassment. This was building a documented termination case. Now here's what happens, Mouse, Vance continued. You redo every unit you finished today. All 47. Stay until they're done right, even if it takes all night. Redoing 8 hours of perfect work would take past midnight, and he'd still need to return for regular shift. But protesting would give Vance more ammunition. Understood, Kieran said. As Vance walked away with his entourage, Kieran noticed Emma watching from quality control. Her face was flushed with anger, gripping inspection tools until knuckles went white. The next weeks blurred in escalating humiliation. Vance assigned broken equipment, then criticized repair time. He scheduled every holiday shift while giving favorites time off. When Kieran's productivity remained high despite sabotage, Vance grew more aggressive. The breaking point came Thursday afternoon when Vance decided to target Emma. Kieran was focused when raised voices drew attention to quality control. Vance stood over Emma's desk, face red with manufactured anger, while Rick and Dillon flanked him like bodyguards. What do you call this? Vance waved a clipboard in Emma's face. 3 units passed with obvious defects. Either you're incompetent or you're deliberately sabotaging standards. Emma's voice remained steady, but Kieran could see trembling hands. Those units met all specifications, Mr. Kruger. I checked twice. You checked twice. Vance's voice rose to a shout. Maybe your checking isn't worth a damn. Maybe we need someone who actually knows quality. Around the floor, workers had stopped to watch. This was different. Emma was well respected, known for competence and fairness. But she'd been kind to Kieran, and everyone knew it. I'd like you to shut your mouth and listen. Vance slammed his clipboard down, sending papers flying. You passed substandard work from your boyfriend Mouse, and now corporate's breathing down my neck. The accusation hung like smoke. Emma's face went pale, then flushed red. Workers exchanged glances, some shocked, others excited by drama. This gossip would spread through the plant like wildfire. That's not true, Emma said firmly. My inspections are based solely on technical specifications. Your inspections are based on who you're sleeping with. Vance's voice carried across the entire floor. Don't think I haven't noticed you making googly eyes at Mouse. Maybe you both need to find work elsewhere. Kieran felt something cold settle in his stomach. Vance wasn't just targeting him. He was destroying Emma's reputation to get at him. Workers whispered, spreading implications. By tomorrow, everyone would assume Emma was passing Kieran's work romantically. You can't talk to me like that. I'll file a complaint with HR, Emma said, standing slowly. Vance laughed harshly. Go ahead. Betty Morrison in HR is my sister-in-law. Good luck with that complaint. That's when Kieran felt his last restraint thread fray. Emma was being destroyed for showing him basic kindness. Her career, reputation, livelihood, all sacrificed to Vance's need for complete humiliation. He started to stand, but Emma caught his eye and shook her head almost imperceptibly. Don't make this worse. So Kieran forced himself down and watched Vance continue his assault. Tell you what, Vance said, voice dropping to something more dangerous than shouting. Since you're so close, maybe Mouse can help solve quality control problems. Rick, Dillon, collect every unit from Station 3 today. Emma's gonna re-inspect every single one while we watch. If even one fails, they both get written up for gross negligence. Rick and Dillon moved with eager bully efficiency. They swept through Assembly Line C, gathering Kieran's work with rough hands that sent units clattering. Workers watched silently as boxes were dumped unceremoniously on Emma's desk. Start inspecting, Vance commanded. Remember, one mistake from your boyfriend and you're both out. Emma's hands shook slightly, picking up the first unit. Kieran knew his work was flawless. It always was. But Vance had authority to declare anything defective. This wasn't about quality control. It was about power, about breaking them both publicly. As Emma worked with Vance breathing down her neck, Kieran's mind drifted to a desert checkpoint outside Kandahar. He'd watched insurgents threaten a local translator who'd helped American forces. The translator had family, children depending on him. Kieran had orders to observe only, gather intelligence without compromising position. But sometimes orders weren't enough. The memory sharpened focus on the present. Emma was almost finished. Every unit had passed. Vance was growing agitated, realizing his scheme wasn't working. That's when Kieran saw the supervisor palm something from his pocket, a small metal shaving that would constitute a defect if it ended up in the housings. Vance moved closer to Emma's desk, positioning to drop the foreign object. His fingers opened slightly, and Kieran could see metal glint. That's when Emma looked up from her work and smiled at Kieran across the factory floor. A small, tired but genuine smile meant to reassure him she was handling the situation. She had no idea what Vance was about to do to destroy both their careers. Something fundamental shifted inside Kieran's chest. The careful walls he'd built around his military training began to crumble. Emma Rodriguez was the first person here to show him basic human decency, and now she was about to pay the price. Vance's hand moved toward the housing Emma was inspecting. "Emma!" Kieran called out, his voice cutting across the factory with unexpected authority. "Step back from your desk." Everyone turned to look. Vance's hand froze halfway to the housing, metal shaving hidden in his palm. For the first time since starting at Thornfield, the entire floor was paying attention to him. "What did you just say?" Vance's face was turning red. Kieran stood slowly, movements deliberate and controlled. When he spoke again, his voice carried quiet confidence of someone who'd given life or death orders. "I said, step back, Emma. Vance has something in his hand that doesn't belong in those housings." The factory went dead silent. Even machinery seemed to quiet. Vance's face cycled through surprise, anger, and calculation before settling on rage. "You little piece of shit," he snarled. "How dare you accuse me?" "Open your hand," Kieran interrupted. His posture had changed subtly. Shoulders back, weight balanced. To most people, he still looked like the quiet mouse. But Emma, watching closely, could see something different in his eyes. Vance looked around at watching faces. Workers had stopped completely, sensing something significant happening. Even shift managers emerged from offices. "I don't have to prove anything to you," Vance said, voice lacking usual conviction. "Then you won't mind showing everyone what's in your hand," Kieran replied calmly. The standoff stretched. Vance glanced at Rick and Dylan for support, but even his crew seemed uncertain. His credibility was on the line before the entire factory. Finally, Vance made his choice. Instead of opening his hand, he lunged forward and shoved Kieran hard in the chest, sending him stumbling backward. "Don't you ever question my authority again, you worthless!" Vance's words cut off as his foot slipped on the metal shaving he'd dropped in his rush to attack. He windmilled his arms trying to catch balance, but weight was committed. He crashed into Emma's desk, scattering equipment and sending housings flying. Several workers clearly saw the metal shaving roll across the floor, evidence of exactly what Kieran had accused. But Vance wasn't finished. Humiliated and caught sabotaging, he pushed off Emma's desk and spun toward Kieran with murder in his eyes. "You're done!" he screamed. "You're fucking done! I'll have you blacklisted from every factory in Ohio!" He charged with fists raised, massive frame powered by fury and desperation. Rick and Dylan moved to flank him, deciding loyalty lay with backing their supervisor regardless of what they'd witnessed. That's when Kieran Moss stopped being a mouse. Vance's haymaker was telegraphed from miles away, exactly the sloppy, emotion-driven attack that would get you killed in real combat. Kieran stepped aside with minimal movement, letting momentum carry Vance past, then drove his elbow into the supervisor's kidney with surgical precision. Vance dropped to one knee with a gasp of pain and surprise. He'd expected to bulldoze the quiet man, not find himself outmaneuvered and hurt. Rick came next, throwing weight behind a clumsy tackle aimed at Kieran's midsection. Kieran dropped his center of gravity and met Rick's charge with an uppercut that caught him under the chin. Rick's head snapped back and he crumpled to the factory floor, unconscious before hitting concrete. Dylan skidded to a halt, courage evaporating as he watched his allies neutralized in less than 10 seconds. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Vance struggled back to his feet, face purple with rage and humiliation. Around the floor, workers stood frozen in amazement. This wasn't the Mouse they thought they knew. "You think you're tough now?" Vance snarled, pulling off his supervisor jacket and revealing muscle-corded arms. "I played varsity football, you little shit. I'll break you in half." He rushed forward again, but with more control, trying to grapple and use size advantage. For a moment it looked like he might succeed. Vance was strong, managing to get hands on Kieran's shirt, but Kieran had been trained to fight bigger, stronger opponents. He used Vance's momentum against him, stepping into the grapple and hooking his leg behind Vance's knee. A quick hip throw sent the supervisor flying through air to land hard on his back against concrete. Vance lay stunned, wind knocked out, staring at the ceiling. Around him, the factory floor had erupted in gasps and exclamations. Workers who'd watched him humiliate others for months were seeing their tormentor laid flat by the person they'd thought weakest. Kieran stood over his fallen supervisor, breathing hard but controlled. This was the moment building since his first day. Every insult, every humiliation, every restraint had led to this point where he had to choose who he was going to be. Vance rolled onto his side and tried pushing himself up, face twisted with pain and rage. "I'll kill you for this," he wheezed. "I'll fucking kill you." He lunged upward from prone position, reaching for Kieran's throat with both hands. It was desperate, wild, the last resort of a man who'd never expected to find himself losing. Kieran caught Vance's wrist as it reached for him, grip precise and unbreakable. For just a moment, he considered the devastating armbar that would snap bone and tendon, the move that would end this permanently and send an unmistakable message to anyone else who might target him or Emma. The factory floor held its collective breath. Even Emma, watching from behind her scattered desk, seemed to sense the violence hanging in air like a storm about to break. But then, Kieran looked into Vance's eyes and saw something he recognized from overseas, the desperate fear of someone who'd pushed too far and found themselves completely outmatched. Vance wasn't an enemy combatant. He was just a bully who'd never learned when to stop, who'd built identity around intimidating people who couldn't fight back. Breaking his arm wouldn't make Kieran stronger, it would just make him another Vance. Instead of applying the armbar, Kieran used the grip to pull Vance close enough to speak directly into his ear. When he spoke, his voice carried quiet authority of someone who'd given life and death orders where weakness meant death. "This stops now," he said softly, but words carried clearly in the silent factory. "The harassment, the sabotage, all of it. You leave me alone, you leave Emma alone, and you leave everyone else alone, because if you don't, next time I won't stop with just putting you on your back." He released Vance's wrist and stepped back, giving the supervisor room to stand. Vance struggled to his feet, face cycling through humiliation, rage, and something that might have been fear. "You think this is over?" Vance's voice cracked slightly. "You think you can assault a supervisor and walk away?" Kieran glanced at the metal shaving still visible near Emma's desk, then at scattered housings that had revealed Vance's sabotage attempt. Half the factory had witnessed the supervisor attacking him first, had seen evidence of planted defects. "I think," Kieran said calmly, "that you should be more worried about explaining to corporate why you were trying to frame employees for defects you caused yourself." Vance's face went white as implications sank in. Around the floor, workers were whispering about what they'd seen. Being caught sabotaging quality reports was a firing offense, That's not, you can't prove, Vance stammered. Actually, Emma's voice cut across his protests. I think I can. She held up her phone, screen showing a video recording. I started filming when you approached my desk. I have everything. The evidence planting, false accusations, the assault. Should make interesting viewing in HR. Color drained from Vance's face completely. Video evidence was everything, and Emma had turned his tactics against him. Dylan had been backing toward the exit since Rick went down, finally broke and ran for the locker room. Rick was regaining consciousness, groaning and holding his jaw where Kieran's uppercut had connected. Plant manager Thompson emerged from his office, drawn by commotion. He took in the scene. Vance disheveled and shaking, Rick on the ground, Dylan gone, Emma holding her phone, and Kieran standing calmly in the center. What the hell is going on out here? Thompson demanded. The next hour passed in a blur of statements, video reviews, and damage control. Emma's recording told the story clearly. Vance's evidence-planting attempt, his unprovoked attack on Kieran, months of documented harassment, other workers finally felt safe reporting. By 5 o'clock, Vance Kruger was cleaning out his office under security escort. Rick was suspended pending investigation. Dylan had quit rather than face questioning about his harassment role. As day shift ended, workers approached Kieran with new respect and amazement. Jake Patterson clapped his shoulder. Never would have guessed you had that in you, man. Old Pete Kowalski nodded approvingly. About time someone put that son of a bitch in his place. But Emma's approach mattered most. She found him at his station as he gathered tools, expression mixing gratitude with curiosity. So, she said quietly, Army? Kieran looked up, surprised. What gave it away? The way you moved. My brother's a Marine. I recognized the training. She paused. Why didn't you tell anyone? Kieran considered the question. Because I came here to build something new. Fighting was my old life. I wanted to try being someone else. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this. And now? Now I know that sometimes being someone else means being exactly who you are when it matters. The following weeks brought dramatic changes to Thornfield Manufacturing. With Vance gone, the toxic atmosphere that had poisoned the factory floor began to lift. Workers who'd been afraid to speak up found their voices. Productivity actually improved without constant harassment and sabotage. Plant manager Thompson, impressed by how Kieran had handled the situation and aware the company had nearly faced a massive lawsuit over Vance's behavior, offered him a promotion to line supervisor. Emma received a commendation for her courage in documenting the incident and standing up to harassment. But the most significant change was in how people saw Kieran himself. The quiet mouse had revealed himself to be something else entirely. Not a predator like Vance, but someone who understood the difference between strength and brutality. On Friday afternoon, exactly 1 month after the confrontation, Kieran found Emma waiting by his station as the shift ended. "You want to grab dinner?" she asked. "I know a place that serves great burgers and actually knows how to cook them." Kieran smiled. The first genuinely relaxed smile he'd worn since starting at Thornfield. "I'd like that." As they walked toward the factory exit together, Kieran reflected on how much had changed. He'd come to Cleveland trying to escape his past, to prove he could succeed through quiet diligence rather than force. He'd learned instead that sometimes the greatest strength lay not in avoiding conflict, but in choosing when and how to engage it. The old Kieran would have left Thornfield rather than fight back, would have found another job and hoped the next environment would be different. But Emma had been right. He was stronger than he'd let people see. Not because of his training or ability to hurt others, but because he'd learned to stand up for what mattered without losing himself in the process. Walking out into the Cleveland evening with Emma beside him, Kieran understood that he hadn't really changed at all. He'd simply remembered who he was, not a mouse or a monster, but a protector. Someone who could be gentle with those who deserved gentleness and firm with those who mistook kindness for weakness. Behind them, Thornfield Manufacturing hummed with sounds of honest work being done by people who no longer had to fear walking through their workplace. And in that sound, Kieran heard something he'd been searching for since leaving the military, the quiet satisfaction of making a place better simply by refusing to let cruelty go unchallenged. The mouse was gone. In his place stood a man who understood that true strength meant knowing when to fight and when to forgive, when to bend and when to stand firm. Most importantly, he'd learned that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't in defeating your enemies, but in refusing to become them. Console.log, revised character count, story.length. Console.log. Does it meet the 20,000 to 25,000 character requirement? Story.length. 20,000 and story.length. 25,000.